Before we dive into this epic tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on more thrilling sci-fi stories. A smile tugged at his lips, and he nodded. "Lyra," he repeated carefully, the syllables foreign in his mouth but spoken with respect. He didn't seem to expect anything else from her, didn't press her for answers or demand she explain herself. He simply focused on making her comfortable, adjusting the temperature in the room and bringing her water. Lyra watched, still bewildered, as he went about his tasks. Every action was deliberate, filled with an unspoken promise that he meant no harm. Yet, her mind struggled to reconcile this gentle behavior with what she had been taught. Humans were supposed to be dangerous, ruthless. But this one was different. He didn't treat her like a burden or a threat. Instead, he looked at her as if she were someone worth saving. It was a concept that shook her to her core. For so long, she had been told that her worth was tied to her strength, her ability to contribute to the collective. When she failed, she became nothing, worthless. But now, here was a human, a creature her people despised, treating her with a kindness that defied everything she knew. As the hours turned into days, she remained wary, but her body began to recover under his care. She started to observe him more closely, noting the way he would hum softly to himself as he worked, the way he always made sure to check on her first thing in the morning. He would talk to her, even though she didn't understand most of his words. It was as if he were trying to fill the silence, to keep her company. Slowly, her fear began to ease. She still didn't trust him, not completely, but the terror that had gripped her heart lessened. He was patient, never pushing her boundaries, giving her space when she needed it. It was strange to feel safe. To think that someone, even a human, would care whether she lived or died. One night, as she lay wrapped in the thermal blanket, she found herself whispering his name softly. "Alex." The word felt strange on her tongue, but she didn't hate it. If anything, it felt like an anchor, something to hold on to in the sea of uncertainty that her life had become. Alex glanced up from his work, his eyes warm and kind. He didn't say anything, just offered her a gentle smile. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra felt a spark of something other than fear. It was tentative, fragile, but it was there, a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. Days passed, and Lyra grew stronger. She still didn't understand why he was helping her, but she couldn't deny the results. Every gesture, every small act of kindness, chipped away at the walls she had built around herself. He was nothing like her people. He was something entirely different, something she couldn't define. But one thing became clear as she watched him move around the small ship, always checking on her, always making sure she was comfortable. He cared, truly cared. And for the first time, Lyra found herself daring to believe that she was worth saving. Lyra's recovery continued slowly but steadily. Each day, she found herself growing a little stronger, able to sit up for longer periods and even speak a few more words in Alex's language. He never pushed her to do more than she could handle, always letting her set the pace. Despite the lingering confusion in her heart, she couldn't help but appreciate his patience. It was so different from everything she'd known before, so far removed from the cold, utilitarian behavior of her own people. They measured everyone's value in terms of utility, where compassion was an afterthought. In contrast, Alex seemed to find value in simply ensuring she was comfortable and happy. It wasn't just the physical recovery, either. As her strength returned, so did her spirit, cautiously unfurling after being suppressed for so long. It had been so easy to believe that her worth was determined by her combat performance, by her adherence to the standards set by her race. They'd ingrained it into her from a young age: show weakness, and you're discarded. Prove your strength, or be forgotten. But here she was, lying in a human ship, recovering because he wanted her to live. It wasn't about usefulness to Alex. It was about something deeper, something she was beginning to grasp. There were moments of clarity when she allowed herself to wonder, why was he doing this? Why would a human, a supposed savage, show more kindness than anyone she'd ever known? When she dared to ask, fumbling through his language to express her bewilderment, he would just smile softly and say, "Because no one deserves to be left alone." That answer haunted her. The simplicity of it was almost incomprehensible. Her people valued strength, conquest, and survival of the fittest. Yet here was this human, who looked at her, not as a failed warrior, but as a person worth saving. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Alex's actions weren't motivated by duty or obligation. There was no strategic advantage for him to gain by helping her. In fact, it was risky. He had no idea if her people would come searching for her or if rescuing her might draw unwanted attention. Yet he stayed. He didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't try to make her feel indebted. It was just selflessness, a concept that seemed almost alien to her. Slowly, something inside her shifted. Lyra started to want to understand him, to learn more about the strange kindness that seemed to flow so naturally from him. She began paying closer attention to the way he spoke, the nuances of his expressions. Every time he brought her food, checked her injuries, or simply sat beside her, she watched, trying to piece together what drove him. There were times when he would talk about his own world, Earth, he called it, and the people who lived there. He described it in vivid detail, painting pictures of sprawling cities and green landscapes that stretched on forever. He told her about his family, about the people he cared about, and how he had become a pilot. His words carried a deep affection, a sense of longing that made her chest ache. There was something so sincere, so profoundly earnest about him that it was hard not to be drawn in. Lyra found herself wanting to speak more, to tell him about her own experiences, though she struggled with the words. She wanted to explain how different their worlds were, how their people valued such radically different things. But it was hard to put it into words, and she found herself hesitating. One day, when she was able to stand on her own for the first time since he'd found her, Alex's smile was brighter than she had ever seen it. He helped her gently, his hands steadying her as she took her first shaky steps. The pride and encouragement in his eyes were unmistakable. There was no impatience, no sense that he thought she was wasting his time. Just pure joy at seeing her recover. That look, so genuine and warm, made her heart clench. She realized then that she didn't want to leave. The thought of returning to her people, to the life she had known before, filled her with dread. She didn't want to go back to a place where she was just another soldier, where her worth was judged by how well she could fight. Here, with Alex, she felt like something more. But how could she tell him that? How could she explain that the thought of being cast aside again terrified her? She tried, stumbling over his language, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Don't want go. Don't leave." The words were awkward and halting, but Alex seemed to understand. His smile softened, and he shook his head gently. "I'm not going to send you away, Lyra," he said quietly. "You can stay as long as you want." Relief washed over her, so intense it made her knees weak. She hadn't even realized how desperately she needed to hear those words until he spoke them. It was the first time in her life that someone had given her a choice, the first time anyone had looked at her and seen her as more than just a tool to be used or discarded. And it changed something fundamental inside her. With each passing day, Lyra's understanding of Alex, and humans as a whole, grew. He wasn't some savage beast, nor was he an emotionless machine driven by cold logic. He was complex. He had a fierce sense of loyalty and a willingness to protect, but it wasn't based on dominance or control. It was rooted in a desire to make things better, to help those who needed it. The more she learned about him, the more she found herself drawn to that quiet strength. She started to share more about herself, about her people's rigid structure and how they discarded anyone who didn't meet their standards. It was hard to talk about, the shame and bitterness still raw, but Alex listened without judgment. When she told him about her family, how they had abandoned her without hesitation, his eyes darkened with something close to anger. "That's not right," he said firmly. "You deserve better than that." His conviction was startling, and it made her want to believe him. But there was still a part of her that couldn't quite accept it. She'd been conditioned to think that her only value lay in her ability to serve. Yet Alex treated her as if her existence alone was worth something. That contradiction was something she struggled with, but she was beginning to want to believe him. To believe that she could be more than what her people had made her. As the days turned into weeks, something unexpected began to bloom between them. It was subtle at first, a growing sense of connection that neither of them spoke aloud. But it was there, in the way Alex would seek her out just to sit in comfortable silence, or the way she found herself wanting to see him smile. It was in the small, everyday moments, like when he would bring her a new piece of equipment to tinker with, or when she would catch him glancing at her with a look of quiet admiration. The bond between them grew stronger, a fragile, beautiful thing that defied logic and expectation. Lyra found herself smiling more, the heavy weight of loneliness lifting bit by bit. She hadn't realized how starved she was for companionship, for someone who truly saw her, until Alex came into her life. He was changing her in ways she hadn't thought possible, breaking down walls she hadn't even known existed. It was terrifying, this vulnerability. But it was also exhilarating. For the first time, she felt like she was truly living, not just existing. And that realization was both liberating and frightening. She didn't know where this strange, unexpected connection would lead them, but she knew one thing for certain. She didn't want to go back to the life she'd known before. Not now, not ever. She wanted to see what the future held with Alex by her side. Lyra's presence aboard the ship gradually became an integral part of Alex's life. The space that had once felt hollow and empty was now filled with an energy that seemed to radiate from her. Each day, she gained a little more confidence, growing accustomed to her surroundings and adapting to the routines of the ship. They began working together on small tasks that Alex initially intended to do alone, but that Lyra insisted on learning. She wanted to contribute, to prove she wasn't just a burden, even though he never treated her like one. She started helping with maintenance, running diagnostic checks, and even assisting in minor piloting tasks when Alex was occupied. This new dynamic wasn't just about sharing the workload, it was about building something together. For Lyra, every opportunity to help, to share in Alex's responsibilities, was a chance to redefine herself. She was no longer just a soldier or a survivor, she was a partner. Every accomplishment, no matter how small, felt like a victory. Alex's encouragement and willingness to teach her had a profound impact, making her believe in her potential beyond the confines of her upbringing. They spent hours talking, delving into deeper topics as their understanding of each other grew. Lyra's command of the human language improved steadily, and with it, her ability to express more complex thoughts and emotions. She spoke of her past with more openness, sharing stories of her training and the ruthless expectations placed on her by her people. Each story revealed more about the hardships she had endured, the loneliness she had felt, and the constant pressure to meet impossible standards. Alex listened patiently, his expression sometimes pained, sometimes thoughtful, but always attentive. He never dismissed her experiences or tried to minimize her struggles, and that alone made it easier for her to keep sharing. But it wasn't just one-sided. Alex opened up about his own experiences, too, the pain of losing comrades, the struggles of being out in the vastness of space, and the loneliness that came with his profession. He told her about the times he'd questioned his purpose, about the isolation that seemed to seep into his bones after so many years of drifting through the stars. He spoke of his own fears and doubts, revealing a vulnerability that was both surprising and comforting. It made Lyra realize that, in a way, they weren't so different. They were two lost souls, both trying to find a place where they truly belonged. That realization deepened their connection in ways neither of them could have anticipated. What had started as a simple act of compassion had evolved into something far more profound. They began to rely on each other in new ways, not just for survival, but for emotional support. Lyra found herself seeking out Alex's company, not because she needed him to care for her, but because she enjoyed being around him. She appreciated the way his presence seemed to steady her, the way his laughter, rare but genuine, could brighten even the darkest moments. As they continued to work side by side, Alex noticed the subtle changes in Lyra. She was no longer the timid, wounded alien he had first encountered. She was growing stronger, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. She took pride in learning new skills, in mastering the intricacies of human technology, and in proving that she could hold her own. There were moments when he would glance at her, watching as she navigated the controls with a steady hand, and feel a surge of admiration. It wasn't just that she was capable, she was resilient, determined, and fiercely intelligent. Qualities that made her stand out, that made him respect her in ways he hadn't anticipated. But there was more to it than that. Somewhere along the way, the lines between friendship and something deeper had begun to blur. Alex found himself caring about Lyra in a way that went beyond simple companionship. He looked forward to their conversations, cherished their shared silences, and felt a strange warmth in his chest whenever she smiled at him. It was a feeling he couldn't quite define, something that defied the boundaries of their different species. But it was real, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. Lyra sensed it too. She noticed the way Alex's gaze lingered on her a little longer, the way his tone softened whenever he spoke to her. There were moments when their hands would brush as they passed each other in the narrow corridors of the ship, sending a spark of something unspoken through her. It was new, this burgeoning awareness, and it made her pulse quicken in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had never experienced anything like it before. Her people didn't form attachments like this. They didn't build bonds that transcended mere duty or obligation. Yet here she was, feeling things she didn't even have words for. Despite the uncertainty, neither of them tried to push it away. They let it build slowly, naturally, like the careful construction of a bridge spanning the gap between their worlds. Each shared glance, each quiet conversation, each moment of laughter added another stone to the foundation of something that felt inexplicably right. There was no rush, no need to define it. They were content to let it unfold at its own pace, savoring the simple joy of being together. But with that growing closeness came a new set of challenges. As Lyra became more involved in the ship's operations, she also became more aware of the dangers that Alex faced. Space was unforgiving, and his line of work often brought him into contact with less than reputable individuals. She started worrying about his safety in a way that was unfamiliar and uncomfortable. It wasn't the cold, detached concern she had been trained to feel for her fellow soldiers. It was something deeper, more personal. She found herself staying up late, anxiously monitoring the ship systems whenever they approached a potentially hostile sector, her eyes scanning the readings for any sign of trouble. Alex noticed her growing anxiety and tried to reassure her, but Lyra's protective instincts had been awakened. She couldn't bear the thought of something happening to him, not after everything they'd been through. It wasn't just about repaying a debt or fulfilling an obligation, it was because she genuinely cared about him. The thought of losing him, of being alone again, made her chest tighten painfully. She didn't know when he had become so important to her, but there was no denying it now. Their relationship continued to evolve, deepening with each shared trial and triumph. There were still barriers between them, cultural differences, language limitations, and the ever-present question of what lay ahead, but they faced each challenge together. Lyra no longer felt like a stranger on Alex's ship. It had become her home, and he had become her anchor, the person who had shown her a different way of living, a different way of being. He had given her something she had never thought possible, a chance to choose her own path, to define her own future. And so, despite the uncertainty, despite the obstacles that still lay in their path, they forged ahead. Every day, Lyra found herself growing more certain that she didn't want to leave, that she didn't want to return to the life she had known before. Her people might never understand, might never accept the choices she had made, but that didn't matter. What mattered was here and now, this fragile, beautiful thing she and Alex had built together. It was more than just survival. It was hope. It was a chance at something more than she had ever dreamed. She wasn't just an abandoned soldier anymore. She was Lyra, someone who had been given a second chance, someone who was learning what it meant to live, not just exist. And that was more valuable than any victory, more precious than any battle won. It was her future, and for the first time, it was one she wanted to fight for. Over time, the bond between Lyra and Alex solidified into something even deeper. The once tentative understanding they had shared had blossomed into a powerful and enduring partnership that transcended the boundaries of species and culture. They were no longer just crewmates navigating the stars together. They had become inseparable companions, each finding solace and purpose in the presence of the other. Lyra, who had once been a lost, fragile soul, was now someone with a clear sense of belonging, a person who had found strength in the very vulnerability she had once despised. But as strong as their relationship had become, it wasn't without its complexities. Both Alex and Lyra knew that their unconventional partnership would be met with scrutiny and resistance if it were ever made public. Despite the trust they had built and the comfort they found in each other's company, the reality of their situation was undeniable. Lyra was still, by the laws of her people, a traitor. For the human authorities, she was an anomaly, a remnant of a war that had left deep scars. If discovered, she would be treated as an enemy combatant, a potential threat to be neutralized rather than a person to be understood. This looming danger was something they both wrestled with quietly. Neither wanted to discuss it, fearing that voicing it aloud would somehow make the threat more real. Yet, it hung over them like a shadow, casting a pall over even the brightest moments. Lyra knew that if the wrong person found out about her existence, everything they had built could come crashing down. She might be captured, imprisoned, or worse. And Alex, too, would face severe consequences for harboring her. He would be labeled a collaborator, his career destroyed, his life turned upside down. The thought of bringing such ruin to him haunted her, gnawing at the edges of her happiness. And then, as if fate had been waiting for just the right moment, the storm finally hit. The message came through one quiet evening when they were orbiting a remote sector of space, far from the major trade routes and well beyond the reach of regular patrols. It was a standard-issue human military communication, encrypted and marked with the highest priority. As Alex read through the terse lines of text, his expression darkened. He had been ordered to return to human space immediately. A high-ranking official had requested an inspection of his vessel, and they were to report back to the nearest space station for a full audit of crew and cargo. The timing was no coincidence. Someone had found out. Panic surged through Lyra at the sight of his grim expression. All the fear she had managed to bury came rushing back in a flood. If they boarded the ship, if they saw her, there would be no way to explain her presence. She would be detained, interrogated, and possibly handed back to her own people. For a moment, the room seemed to spin, the walls closing in around her. But Alex remained calm, his gaze steady as he looked at her. There was no fear in his eyes, only a fierce determination. "We'll handle this," he said softly, the conviction in his voice cutting through her panic like a lifeline. "I won't let them take you." True to his word, Alex began to devise a plan. It was risky, bordering on reckless, but it was the only option they had. With the clock ticking down, they prepared to face the inevitable inspection. Every second was a reminder of what was at stake, the fragile life they had built together, the trust they had nurtured, and the bond that had grown stronger with every shared hardship. Lyra felt a surge of guilt for the danger she was putting him in. She wished she could simply disappear, to save him from the fallout of her presence. But Alex would hear none of it. They were in this together, and there would be no turning back. When the human inspection team finally arrived, Lyra's heart pounded like a drumbeat in her chest. They were thorough, combing through every inch of the ship with cold, professional efficiency. Alex remained composed throughout, answering every question with calm precision, his demeanor giving away nothing. He deflected their inquiries deftly, steering them away from any mention of unauthorized personnel or suspicious cargo. For a moment, it seemed as though they might get through unscathed. But then came the moment they had both feared. One of the inspectors pulled out a scanner, an advanced model designed to detect unusual life signatures. Lyra's blood ran cold as she watched Alex tense. There was no way to hide from it. If the scanner picked up her presence, it would be over. The inspector began to sweep the device through the cargo bay, his brow furrowed in concentration. Lyra held her breath, willing herself to remain utterly still, to become invisible. And then, miraculously, the scanner beeped once and went silent. The inspector frowned, tapping at the screen, but the device showed nothing out of the ordinary. With a muttered curse, he moved on, clearly frustrated. Lyra's knees nearly gave out as relief washed over her. She glanced at Alex, who shot her a fleeting, almost imperceptible smile. It had worked. His last-minute modification to the ship systems had masked her presence just long enough to fool the scanner. They were safe, for now. But the close call was a stark reminder of just how precarious their situation truly was. They couldn't keep running forever, couldn't keep hiding in the shadows, constantly looking over their shoulders. Sooner or later, someone else would come looking, and next time, they might not be so lucky. They needed a permanent solution, a way to secure Lyra's place in human space without risking their safety. And for that, they would need allies. The search for someone they could trust was fraught with difficulties. There were few people in Alex's network who wouldn't immediately turn them in. Most saw aliens like Lyra as little more than enemies, relics of a brutal war that had left lasting scars. But Alex was determined, sifting through his contacts, carefully reaching out to those he believed might be sympathetic. It was a delicate dance. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and everything would unravel. Finally, they found a lead. An old friend of Alex's, someone with enough influence and discretion to potentially broker a deal. It was a long shot, but it was their only hope. Alex arranged a meeting, taking every precaution to ensure they wouldn't be followed. Lyra stayed hidden aboard the ship, her heart in her throat as she waited for news. Hours dragged by, each one stretching interminably. When Alex finally returned, his expression unreadable, she braced herself for the worst. But to her shock, he was smiling. It was a small, weary smile, tinged with exhaustion, but it was genuine. The friend had agreed to help. There were conditions, of course, strict stipulations to ensure Lyra's cooperation and loyalty, but it was a start. With this alliance, they would be able to negotiate Lyra's status, to carve out a place for her in human space where she wouldn't have to live in constant fear of discovery. It wasn't freedom, not entirely, but it was a path forward. A chance to build a life that wasn't defined by hiding and running. For the first time in a long while, hope flickered in Lyra's chest. It wouldn't be easy, and there were still countless hurdles to overcome. But with Alex by her side, she believed they could face whatever came their way. Together, they had survived the worst the galaxy had to offer. Now they would fight for a future where she could stand beside him openly, not as a fugitive or an outcast, but as an equal. As someone who had finally found a place to belong.